let's come to the visit to Vietnam. Um, so just walk us through it. I mean, what is your first memory? You're on this Western Pacific tour, and you go into Vietnam. Just kind of start us at the beginning of the story, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I came to understand the context of that visit to Vietnam once the ship docked in Saigon. So what are we doing there? So what happened was that I was on the USS St. Paul, which was where the flag of the Seventh Fleet was, Admiral of the Seventh Fleet. And they take this heavy cruiser, which is 1,200 feet long, drafts like 38 feet up the Saigon River. So this heavy cruiser, which is carrying the flag of the Seventh Fleet Admiral and his band and his staff, they take this 1,200 foot long vessel that drafts 38 feet up this river, 46 miles up the Saigon River, which is not an extremely big river.
Right.
So that in itself was very unusual. What are we doing? And there was a flyer distributed from the Public Information Office on the ship explaining that this was a diplomatic visit, that the United States was showing support for the government of South Vietnam. And not much more than that, but just that much at least.
Yeah.
So they take this ship up this river and dock it across. There's a very, very wide boulevard in Saigon that runs along the river, and the presidential palace is on the other side of that boulevard.
Right.
And dock it there. Interestingly, they ran it in the mud trying to turn it around, and took about 30 LSTs to help pull it out of the mud so they could get it turned around, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So, and then what was our job there? Not the ship's job or the admiral's job, but the band's job. The band's job was to play honors for a presidential visit of President Diem. And so that caused us all to think, all right, who is Diem and what's the situation here? Well, I get it, because I had read Lederer and I understood the French defeat in 1954. And so now we're 6-7 years after that, and the situation is volatile. And so Diem came on the vessel along with an entourage. And not only did we play honors for him and an official saluting of the two flags and all of that, but there was a little bit of dance band entertainment later for the captain and the admiral and Diem and his entourage. And that was not all that unusual. We had done that in other places as well. But then we were given the opportunity to go on Liberty that evening. And we went in civilian clothes. They told us not to go in uniform. There were, my understanding, and I understood this at the time, that at the time there were about 2,500 MAG advisors, military assistance advisors in Vietnam. But there was heavy military presence around, US military presence. There were a lot of Jeeps, there were a lot of military vehicles. I'm sure that they were that they'd been commandeered to Saigon to protect during this particular diplomatic visit. But under the gangplank, as we went on Liberty in the evening, there were ARVN troops, ARVN soldiers in full battle gear, camouflage gear. I think that was probably as much for show as for anything else, an intimidating show. But it got our attention. We went ahead out into the city. It was pretty interesting. We all hailed a taxi, and when we compared prices, it was clear that several of us had paid like 4 or 5 times more than the others,
yeah, right.
Which didn't surprise me. I quite understood that.
Right.
The next morning, we were taken by bus 10 or 15 miles out of town to a Catholic orphanage, Don Bosco Orphanage, where we played a small concert. But what got our attention was that there were 3 or 4 Jeeps, Army Jeeps with with personnel and one army truck with troops sitting in the back, accompanying the bus out and back on this trip, which made us feel a bit vulnerable, I have to say.
So you've kind of answered this. Let me just pitch the question to you. As I think of the different ports you can go to, we could talk about Olongapo in the Philippines, and for lack of a better word, what's the vibe? And the vibe of Olongapo is madness and craziness and human nature not usually at its best. If I think of Singapore, then I think it's nice to be off the ship, but this place is pretty uptight. What's the vibe like in Saigon in 1960 when you're there? You've kind of described it already, but how would you describe sort of just what you're picking up in the air?
I think what we were picking up in the air was some tension, and I was not in any position to judge the real sources of that tension or how significant it was. All that I can remember about that was feeling somewhat vulnerable and being on guard because we had no idea what might or might not happen. And of course, before we went on liberty, we were warned to play low, not to be ostentatious, not to stay in any one place for too long a period of time. And what they said was, if you're going to get drunk fast, which was kind of interesting. But that was the atmosphere. It was very, very different from someplace like Olongapo or Hong Kong or Taipei. We were on guard the whole time.
And they have you in civilian clothes rather than uniform in this port.
That was very interesting. That was the only time that I can recall during my tenure over there that was ever the instruction. Wow.
What memories do you have? I understand you're busy playing the trombone in the band. Do you have any particular memories of the orphanage other than being there? Any images that stick in your mind from the orphanage?
I remember, that's an interesting question for me because I remember the faces of the kids. These were all orphans. I don't know that I reflected on it at the time, but later on, it struck me that these are probably all war orphans. These are probably from families that had been victims of the war. I didn't focus on that at the time, but the faces of a number of the kids have, to this day, for some reason, have stuck with me. What strikes me is there was a sense of pleading. Now, I don't know if I'm imposing that and imposing it as a result of my own reflections later in life, or if I had that impression at the time. I kind of think I had that impression at the time, and I think that's why the faces have stuck with me. Yeah, I can't be sure about that, but that's how I've put it together. I do remember the faces very well.
You're not in Saigon very, very long. What, a total of 2 days? Is that right?
Probably a day and a half.
A day and a half. Any other memories? I do want to come back and ask some, questions about playing when Ziem comes aboard the ship. Any other memories you have of Saigon? I mean, just one question that's in my mind is, did you happen to hear French spoken on the streets at all at that point?
Yes, we did hear some French, particularly when we went to commercial establishments, when we went to souvenir shops and when we went to some of the bars, there was some French spoken. And we stopped in one bar where there was a terrific jazz quintet playing and a very, very wonderful female vocalist. And many of the people there were speaking French. And that really struck me. One thing that really struck with me was going up the river. And this is a big, big vessel. And the wake was really very significant. And on the shore, there were dwellings that were built on posts, on stilts, set into the river shore, and many of these toppled over because of the force of the vessel. And I thought, wow, that's kind of nasty. We did actually see in a couple of places a couple of people jumping into the river and swimming back to shore. So
Yeah.
that those dwellings toppling over in the river really got my attention. I asked the Lieutenant JG about that. I don't know where I got the courage to do that, but I did. And that he said they've been warned. Okay, that's fine. So what are they supposed to do with the warning? I guess they can vacate the dwelling, but the dwelling is still going over. And that brought home to me that the U.S. has a power that it can exercise whenever and wherever it wants to, in whatever way it wants to do it, if it chooses to do so. And so the next question to my mind was, okay, what's the reception on the part of the people then? If I'm living in a dwelling and that dwelling is destroyed or has to be put back together, how am I going to feel about these people? And then the next question is, well, we're defending them. And that raises a wonderful set of complex questions, which I don't think I had the perspective to really frame or deal with when I was 19 years old in 1961, but or however old I was, 21, but which I really worked on later, because that for me was a manifestation of an imperial power subject to the policy of this industrial mighty colossus striding the world, and what the consequences of that are, not only for the countries that are on the receiving end of that power, but what are the consequences domestically as well.
What I hear you describing is, okay, so why are we going to Saigon? We're going to Saigon to demonstrate our support for the regime of Ngo Dinh Diem in Saigon and to support the mission of South Vietnam, not falling to communism. And then you have this experience that the ship is going down the Saigon River, and the wake is so strong. The homes along the river deal with wakes all the time, but not from ships that big. And so the wake is actually knocking some homes down and knocking them presumably into the river. And this seems to suggest a kind of indifference to the well-being of the people living along the river. And so correct me if my perception is wrong, but what I'm hearing you describe is a young Steve Haycox who detects something of at least a paradox, that we're here to defend these folks, but the folks along the river were kind of indifferent to our impact on them. How do these things fit together? Is that kind of what you're describing?
Oh, absolutely. And the Lieutenant JG that I asked about this said to me, well, this is just the cost of doing what we have to do. And I thought that's a poor explanation. Now, as I say, I don't think I had the perspective to really frame that the way I would later in life. And I'm just I'm an E5. I'm just an enlisted guy. So I have to assume, which I'm sure that I did, that this is all necessary and okay, or it wouldn't be going on. I think that's how I understood it at age 21. That's as far as my thinking got. Later on, of course, I think I was able to explore much more fully what the implications of all that are.
Was part of that, I don't even think the term Viet Cong is being used in 1960. As the war goes on, now we're hearing about the Viet Cong all the time. Did you find yourself, as the years went by, reflecting back on that incident and understanding why some people might be persuaded by the arguments of the Viet Cong and go to the Viet Cong side?
Oh, absolutely. That came very clear to me later on. Yeah, we can justify all of this on the basis of saving the free world, but are we blind to the consequences?
Yeah, and I link what you just said to what we were talking about a few minutes ago. There's sort of the ideal And then there's the effect of people actually on the ground. So the ideal is we want to help South Vietnam and keep it as part of the free world. And so one of the things we're doing is we're bringing this ship up the Saigon River. In the process, the huge wake is knocking over some of the boats, and well, that's tough for those people. But not understanding that those people talk to other people, right? And so I think this is a very important point that you're making, the consequences of these things. So you described this event for us. You're playing in the band. Diem comes aboard. Do you remember what tunes you were playing? Can you just describe that event for us?
Well, first thing is his entourage arrives with a lot of vehicles on the shore. He comes up the gangplank. He was dressed in a white suit, white buck shoes, hatless, and rather diffident in his demeanor.
Hmm.
He was greeted by the admiral at the top of the gangplank. The band was off to the side. There were I don't know, 10 or 15 chairs. But as he arrives at the top of the gangplank, we play honors. And of course the admiral salutes and Diem salutes, which I found was interesting. And then they sit, and the captain of the vessel welcomes them. And then the admiral says, we're happy to be here, happy we could bring this ship up here. We want the world to understand that the United States stands fully behind the Republic of Vietnam. Diem says something in the order of, we're happy to have you here. This is an important visit for us. And then that's about it. Then the admiral and Diem disappear, and they're gone for probably half an hour. And while they are gone, we're playing some marches. I think we actually played a Broadway tune of some sort, just to entertain the rest of the party. There's nothing to do while these guys are talking. Then they come back, and once again, they go to the top of the gangplank. We play honors again. Everybody salutes, and Jim goes down to the vehicles, and they're off, and that's the end of it. All of this is being photographed profusely. Lots of flash cameras going off all the time. So we understood that this was in fact a diplomatic show of U.S. face, and behind that face, U.S. force. That was very, very clear.